It's essential for a company to have a shareholders agreement and a memorandum of incorporation.
As a sole proprietor, you do actually take on all the risk.
It's a high risk document to sign. Any and all law that pertains to the running of a business or business activity.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Business Podcast. So excited to have Rainier with us still here. Rainier, let's speak a little bit about commercial law. First, tell us, what is commercial law?
Okay, so commercial law is basically the law relating to businesses or business activity.
Okay.
So when a lot of people think about commercial law or company law, it's a lot of synonyms for it. But I think the best way of describing it is just any and all law that pertains to the running of a business or business activity, and that could affect it out of a legal or regulatory aspect.
Yeah, sure. And that's great that you said now is a business activity, because so you can have commercial law while still trading as a sole proprietor.
Yes, but it is limited, but
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So maybe explain to us in the different risk or the different laws that's applicable in our individual capacity as a sole proprietor versus company or close corporation and versus a trust then.
Yeah, so sole proprietor, there's less laws that apply to a sole proprietor
Yeah.
because obviously it's an individual trading in his own name.
Yes.
So he takes on all the risk. Even if
Yes.
it's a partnership, they take on all the risk and it's jointly divided.
Yeah.
But if he employs someone, the basic conditions of employment, the Labour Relations Act still applies.
Yeah.
If he is for some reason, if he does well in his business and he needs to be registered for that applies.
Yes.
The tax will apply to anyone
Yeah.
that must pay tax. So it's not that now you're a sole proprietor, you are shielded from all those laws. That's not how it works.
Yeah, that's great. And it's so great that you touched on that, because all the laws are still applicable. And I mean, as a sole proprietor, you do actually take on all the risk. And the same like in a company that's registered as an incorporated, right?
Yes.
It's a personal liability company. And so let's say now when people register a private company and they have shareholders and they have directors, who takes the risk in a company like that?
So generally, it will be the directors. So you have people that manage the company, and you have people that own the company.
Yes.
So the managers or the directors, and the owners or the shareholders.
Yes.
So generally, they've got two different hats that they put on. It can be the same person. You can be a director and a shareholder at the same time, but you must put on the adequate hat.
Yes.
So in terms of that, the directors will then go and they will manage basically the company. They will make all decisions relating to how the companies run. And then the shareholders, they will make almost like the overarching decisions. What do we do with the extra capital that we got for the year, the profit that we made, things like that. They will then make decisions on. And 99% of the time, the decisions of the shareholders will trump the decisions of the directors.
Yeah. That's great to know that. So then, is there where does it get to a point where the decisions that the directors make in a company directly influences the risk of the shareholders? Because I think where a lot of things comes down to, like, people that's investors or shareholders, they get scared because I think if the company fails, they will also be held liable for the debt, which isn't necessarily immediately like that, right? Because you get the directors, which takes main responsibility. But where does it get to a point where when a director trades recklessly, it affects the shareholder?
Yeah. So a quick answer will be if the company loses, so if there's losses or debt in the company that they are not liable for, then shareholders will have to either use company money or have to provide more capital to pay that debts. That's a short answer. But the longer answer is that, directors can do certain things in a company, But most of the time, 99% of the time, those decisions that they make, if it's put to resolution, must be confirmed by the shareholders. So it's not that, because I had a case now where directors and shareholders are the same people,
Yeah.
but then they had a directors meeting and 2 out of the 3 directors voted for directors remuneration.
Yes.
But they have a outstanding mortgage bond in the company of more than 2 million rand.
Sure.
So now they want to pay directors remuneration, which is
Yeah.
very wrong.
Yeah.
And then, but they can't just start paying the directors remuneration because the directors decided so. The shareholders must approve it first.
Yeah.
So there is certain checks and balances in place that limits the liability in a company.
Yeah.
But when the director trades recklessly, or you call it a fiduciary duty, they're negligent in that circumstances.
Yeah.
Then they can be held personally liable for that.
Yes.
And the company isn't necessarily held liable for that. But yeah, so there are ways of of navigating that space. It's not a 1 + 1 is 2, and
Yeah.
how the shareholders must pay for everything.
Exactly. So who then at the end of the day appoints a director?
The shareholders will appoint a director.
Okay.
Yeah.
So every shareholder can appoint a director, so can get a representative on. So say for instance you have 2 shareholders.
Yes,
Should there be 2 directors?
it could be.
There could be.
Yeah,
but-
so it's a minimum of 1 director
Yeah.
in a privately owned company. But I mean, they can decide to have as many directors as they want. I'm not sure if there's a limit of directors, but obviously it must be feasible for them to do that.
Yes.
But if the 2 directors now decide together that they each have got a representative,
Yes.
and then they get a 3rd director in, that is, if that's their prerogative, then they can do that.
And so every shareholder is allowed to appoint a director if they have enough voting rights?
Yes.
Okay, so everyone, that's great to know then. And then in terms of trust, I mean, because we touch now on shareholders and directors and the legal responsibility and
Yes.
the risk. So now on a trust, Alta also touched on that a little bit, but just the trustees and the beneficiaries, where's the risk there in terms of liabilities and everything?
So as I discussed with the managers and the owners, we
Yeah.
obviously have the same thing with the trustees and the beneficiaries.
Yes.
So the trustees will in their capacity as a trustee become liable, but it's not that they are personally liable if there's an arrear account or whatever. It's only if they were negligent or if they
Okay.
did not take care of their fiduciary duty
Yeah.
in acting to the benefit of the beneficiaries.
Yeah.
So remember, when something vests in a trust, okay, it's not transferred to the trust, it vests in the trustees for the benefit of a beneficiary.
Yeah,
So it's not that the trust owns the thing,
yeah.
it's vested in the trustees for the benefit
Sure.
of the beneficiaries.
Yeah, and that's important to know, right? And I think the one thing that is like becomes almost mandatory to sign these days is surety.
Yes.
And now you have a trust, which we essentially say should become risk-free, but you sign surety there.
Yes.
And now in your personal capacity or in your company, the company is not doing great. So you're saying you're going to liquidate, but you sign surety. Is there a way to get around surety? And what exactly does surety mean for us?
Yeah, so generally, I will not recommend people signing sureties just
Yeah.
because it's a high risk document to sign.
Yeah.
Because most of the time it involves just not necessarily risky business decisions, but just something where you can lose a lot. So as a trustee, in signing a surety, you must take into account that okay, there is a personal aspect with regards to this. If the popo hits the fan, but also there's a chance or possibility that the trust might, become insolvent.
Yes.
So that is also a possibility. So I would rather, try and do 99 other things before signing a surety.
Yeah.
But when signing a surety, at least have, your bookkeeper, your CA, or your lawyer look at the thing and give you an opinion on it.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. And then, but I mean, obviously, if the bank doesn't want to give you a loan, if you don't sign surety, there's nothing you can do about it.
Oh, I mean, but getting a loan from the bank is not the only way of trying to get finance.
Yes.
But to answer your question, yeah, it's either you sign the surety to get the loan
Yeah.
or you don't. So it's just that's the risk you have to
Exactly.
take.
Yeah, I mean, it's such valuable advice. And so when we get to a point where let's speak about maybe quickly on marriages, right? Because now
Yes.
you married outside of community of property with a crew, and you married inside of community of property. So inside of community of property, risks are carried together.
Yes.
Outside of community of property, the risk is split.
Yes.
But now people go and buy a house together. Do they have risk together again?
Yeah, so people must remember when it's an asset, when risk is attached to an asset, the first thing that will happen is if the popo hits the fan, is the risk of the asset will be put forward. So let's for instance say you buy a house.
Yeah.
And you both buy the house, and both of your names are on the mortgage, but you married outside of community of property. What will then happen is the bank will then go to either one, because they can go to or the one or the other,
Yes.
and try and collect the debt, or they will just seize the asset.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that they will run right to you. They will first negotiate with you and try and see how you
Yeah.
can help it. But there is an asset that they can take as well and sell
Yeah.
to collect the funds again.
Yeah, that's great. So let's, while we're on the topic of partnerships, let's
Yes.
speak about partnerships in companies, right?
Yes.
Two people, two shareholders. What is the importance of having a shareholders agreement?
Yeah, so shareholders agreement is, I would say, essential. It's essential for a company to have a shareholders agreement and a memorandum of incorporation.
Yes.
Those are the two essential documents to get your company going.
Yeah.
Okay. So for a shareholders agreement, it's important because it puts out the A, B, and C's of the company
Yes.
and how the relationship between the shareholders are managed.
Yeah.
Okay, so that will include what is the percentage allocation in the shares. Are they 50-50 shareholders, or how does that work?
Yeah.
How does it work to get a third-party shareholder in,
Yes.
selling some of the shares or issuing more shares? How does that work? How does dispute resolution work?
Yeah.
What happens when you get a lockout, when there's a dispute that cannot be resolved between
Yeah.
the two? So it's essential that all those terms get put together into a document that can manage that relationship.
Yes.
Because people will change.
Yes.
People change.
Definitely.
So it's better to have something on paper that won't change unless they agree that it changes.
100%. And I think it's so important to set that expectation from the get-go.
Yes.
And I mean, it's so important. So how does a dispute get resolved without a shareholders agreement?
So generally, they will just fight with one another,
Yeah.
and then after that, they will most likely refer it to mediation or arbitration.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't work, they will most likely take it to court.
Sure.
So there's been a slight change in a couple of years with regards to mediation and arbitration.
Yeah.
Prior to instituting legal proceedings, is that it's now a requirement that you must at least try.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it could be very difficult to do that because arbitration and mediation is expensive, and in some circumstances it's more expensive than going to court.
Yeah. Sure.
But yeah.
So, I mean, in the accounting field, sometimes people speak about a grudge purchase to pay an accountant, right, to get that services done. And so in the legal field, I mean, it's also, it's quite a hefty exercise for people in terms of a financial value. People think it's always expensive. So maybe just mention one or two risks of not having legal advice.
Yeah, so I think we touched on it earlier. There are so many laws in South Africa
Yeah.
that most people don't even know of.
Yeah.
I mean, just in a company context, you've got the Companies Act. If you're still a closed corporation, along with that, you've got the Closed Corporations Act. Then you've got, the Labour Relations Act, Basic Conditions of Employment Act,
Yeah.
Occupational Health and Safety Act. You've got the VAT Act, the Tax Act.
Yes.
So the list just goes on,
Yeah.
and it's impossible for a layman or even someone that studied law
Yeah.
and didn't go and become a lawyer to keep up to date with all those compliance
Yes.
and regulatory aspects. So I would say that's one thing that they can look at. And also, I think it's mitigating risk.
Yes.
That is one of the main things I focus on, is trying to mitigate risk so that the liability doesn't fall on the shareholders or the directors
100%.
or whatever. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things I could mention, but
Yeah.
I think that is probably the most important things that,
Yeah.
that people need to take care of.
Ranier, this was so valuable. I think there's so much that we can still speak about. But small businesses, get legal advice. Contact Ranier if you need any legal advice. Ranier, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Desiree.